On today's episode, we have the final mock draft of the 2025 NHL draft class here at Locked On NHL Prospects. It's a two-parter, but we're kicking it off with picks 1 through 26.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's episode, we are diving into the NHL draft class. It is under a week away. It really is just over the horizon at this point. Things are ticking down. And with that, here we go with the final mock draft that we have to offer you folks here for the season. So we're making it a bigger one than usual. This isn't just a top 32. This is a top 50 mock draft that we're splitting into 2 episodes, but uploading together. So as soon as you finish watching this first episode, the second episode is already up. So you can go and watch that as well, but it would have been just way too much to force into a single show. So here we are splitting it up, and it's going to be a really interesting draft this year. And with this mock draft, I tried to reflect some of the shifting that we see in terms of the likelihoods of what's going to occur there on draft day. So it's as up to date on the rumors as you could want at this stage, 1 week out from the draft. But before we delve into everything here today, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So, another mock draft. We've done, I believe this is our 4th of the year. It may be the 3rd, but I'm pretty sure we've done 3 of these already. But it's a very fun exercise, and you can probably see over the course of these mock drafts in the past 2 months or so, the developments in how these prospects are being viewed, how we as scouts expect NHL teams to value talent, and that has shifted over these previous months. So let's just dive straight into it here. And unlike previous ones, we actually have graphics for this episode. So if you're watching on YouTube, you have something to watch here on your screen, and it's showing you picks 1 through 13. We're going to move on to picks 14 through 26 later on the show. But let's kick things off here with the big man, number 1, the image that is up on your screen at the moment, Matthew Schaefer to the New York Islanders. There's a lot of movement here at the draft. Is he 100% sure thing at number 1? I do not believe so. I think that there are multiple players that have a real chance at going in this slot. I think Michael Misa's name's been thrown around. I think James Hagens could still be a dark horse to end up there on Long Island. But what I find interesting here with Matthew Schaefer is there might be more than just his value as a player that makes him valuable to the New York Islanders. This might be a player that could convince a long-term defensive partner like Noah Dobson, for instance, to stick around and sign an extension. I think that the Islanders are going to look at this in a big picture mode of which move can you do with this first overall pick that is going to have the best ripple effects for your franchise long term. And I think with Matthew Schaefer getting a high likelihood number 1 defenseman in the NHL, high character, one of the youngest players in this year's draft class, incredibly mobile, great passer of the puck, great shot from the blue line, wonderful handling, high-end IQ, great defensive habits, good on retrievals, defending the rush. This is a Miro Heiskanen type player. Maybe if the ceiling ends up being lower than that, you're still talking about a Devon Toews style of NHL talent. And I think that that's a kind of player that you take a swing on at number 1. If you're kind of like fallback game as a Devon Toews, a player that the Islanders probably should have held on to a couple of years ago there when they dealt him for 2 second-round picks, I believe it was, to the Colorado Avalanche. Matthew Schaefer is your guy here at number 1. Moving on to 2nd overall, the first bomb here of the mock draft of an unexpected selection with the San Jose Sharks. And I'm not sure that my good friend and colleague over at Locked On Sharks, JD Young, would be a fan of this selection. I think he's very much in that Michael Misa train at number 2, which I do believe remains the most likely case scenario at the end of the day. But Anton Frondell's stock is rising. as we were entering the draft. This final week, you always kind of hear more rumblings, and the rumblings around Frondell are that he might go higher than people are expecting, and people are already expecting him to go around 3rd overall, 4th overall. So maybe 2nd overall. And I think for the San Jose Sharks, this would be a very different profile to what they have already in Celebrini and what Michael Misa would offer them. There's a lot more physicality, more goal-scoring punch. This is a player with real defensive solidity. I think that Michael Misa's defensive details are as good, if not better, than Frondell's, but the defensive physicality just isn't at that same level yet, which I think teams are going to value. I think that he'd be a really interesting fit in San Jose. Not the player I would select if I had the 2nd overall pick. I would be going Misa 10 days out of 10 in this slot, but still, I think that Frondell would offer a diversification in terms of that offensive core in San Jose that could be really appealing for Mike Grier and co. So he's the player I have going at number 2 in the final mock draft of the season here. At number 3, should be no shocker here whatsoever. If you are a Blackhawks fan, if Michael Misa is on the board when you are selecting, he's the guy you should be taking your pick on, because he is a do-it-all centerman, high-end shot, high-end playmaker, excellent skater, high-end IQ, works very hard defensively. He's got that motor. He's got details. He's got the habits. He's got the intelligence. There's not much he doesn't have. Maybe the playoff resume this season is a bigger question mark in terms of his overall toolkit. I think he was a -10 in that first round series defeat against the Erie Otters, who were lacking Matthew Schaefer, by the way. That was a Malcolm Spence-led team in that series, and they just blew Saginaw out of the water game after game after game in that series. Michael Misa was not amazing in that playoff series. No one really was in Saginaw, but that's perhaps a question looming over him. But if I'm selecting as a scout, having watched him all season long, not a concern I personally have. I think this is a player who is going to be a leader on and off the ice. Everything I've heard in terms of parents of players that are in his surroundings and people that I've just encountered him a few times, just always biggest class act, like just an incredibly mature, kind, thoughtful person that you would love to have in your locker room. He fights hard, he battles, he rallies the troops when they need to do it. Didn't happen in the playoffs this year, but hey, they won a Memorial Cup a year ago, so don't write that off either for Michael Misa, who'd be fantastic in Chicago as a Connor Bedard compliment. Moving on at number 4, we have the Utah Mammoth. Almost said Utah Hockey Club there, getting used to it slowly. The Utah Mammoth going for Brady Martin, the violent center, who has a lot of skill as well. Perhaps the skill gets lost sometimes in these conversations because the violence is just so overwhelming and the key thing to kind of talk about in this player's profile. But a player I think that really convinced Utah at the Combine in their interview process. And beyond just the interview, beyond the person, and he's a very authentic person. He comes across very sincerely. He's a farm boy. He's got that farm strength, genuinely the hay bale strength he's got flowing through his veins. Hardest hitter in the draft class by a country mile. I think he'd be a great fit in Utah. I think he brings an element to that forward core in terms of blending violence and skill that they lack currently. Even players in the system like Daniil Boot don't really have this kind of combination of violence and skill in the same capacity, especially playing a center role like Brady Martin does. I think he'd be a great complement to guys like Dylan Guenther and Logan Cooley and Clayton Keller, whoever you want to pair him with in that top 6. I think he would do really well alongside. But moving on to 5th overall, we have the Nashville Predators selecting, and I think that James Hagens is the player here for Nashville. I think that there's other options here that would be very appealing. Caleb Desnoyers maybe being at the top of that list as a Ryan O'Reilly, like the next one in terms of learning from O'Reilly and in that lineup, and also being able to grow into that kind of style long term, especially with that combination of defensive intelligence and physicality, two-way intensity and playmaking skill. There's so much that Desnoyers has to offer. But I think that James Hagens is still the bet here. He has superstar level talent. He's the only player left on the board here that has that, in my opinion. He is a guy that's very much on the brink for me between my first and second tier. And the first tier, only currently consists of Michael Misa and Matthew Schaefer. Matthew Schaefer's that one. But James Hagens has been flirting with that tier for months for me. And I think he's a guy that would bring dimension to Nashville in terms of speed and dynamism and playmaking skill that they really lack at the moment, especially among young talent. They have so much depth in the prospect pool, but what they lack is that blue chip element to build around. James Hagens would be that, especially if you envision a future where you're pairing him with a guy like Philip Forsberg, who can bring power, he can bring skill, he can match that offensive intelligence and pace. I think that would be a lethal combination for quite a few years. As 6th overall, we have the Philadelphia Flyers selecting Jake O'Brien of the Brantford Bulldogs, a very skilled playmaking center, excellent handling ability. We've talked about him all year. Definitely a riser from being a mid-teen guy to being a real top 10, even top 7 candidate here by the time of the draft. On my personal board, he still is closer to that mid-teen range. He's kind of around the 13 to 14 spot for me personally, because I think I still have some questions around junior level habits in his game. But if he were to hit his upside and hit that skill potential, easily could go a top 5 in a redraft. That potential is very much here. He's definitely in that tier that stretches up here to the 6th overall spot, 5th overall spot. But I think for Philadelphia, they will have fallen in love with the idea of pairing a playmaker and a handler like O'Brien with Matvei Michkov. That could be a truly dynamic duo. You're still missing a power forward element on that line who can bring more physicality and a bit more just range and size, I believe. But in terms of complementary offensive toolkits, I think O'Brien and Michkov would be an excellent pairing. So that's what I have the Flyers going for here. At number 7, we have the Boston Bruins. And I was really, really considering actually doing a bit of a different thing for the mock draft here, and that was mocking a trade. I think the New York Islanders would very much be vying that selection if James Hagens were to fall to 7th overall. I think they could very much have a trade in the works for that scenario. But that's not what was happening here. So we have the Boston Bruins going for Caleb Desnoyers, who fell into their laps a little bit, a player who's likely going in the top 6, top 5 range on draft day, but is going here at 7th overall because guys like Brady Martin went ahead of him. But I think he'd be a great fit in Boston. I mean, a Quebecois two-way center who brings a bit of a physical edge, high-end intelligence, playmaking ability up the wazoo. There's so much to like here with a player like Desnoyers. Whether that pressure of becoming the next Patrice Bergeron would be a bit overwhelming remains to be seen if he ends up in this spot. But I think he'd be a great fit in Boston of what they value, what they want to build around, of just a cornerstone top 6 center. Whether he ends up a first-line tier like a Bergeron, or maybe a second line tier like a David Krejci, I think that either way, you're getting a really valuable asset to build around for the next couple decades here. So Caleb Desnoyers goes to the Boston Bruins at 7th overall. Moving on to 8th and wrapping up this first segment, we have the Seattle Kraken selecting Porter Martone of the Brampton Steelheads, a very physical player who's able to explode in violence, but still has to learn to use his physicality to create those smaller advantages. A very dynamic player when he wants to be, but sometimes the skill gets ahead of him. I think he's a guy that things will have to kind of come together with this player, but he has easily some of the highest upside of any player in this entire draft class. If he hits, this is a player that could be your Tage Thompson style of first line winger, has all the skill in the world, moves quite well for his frame, brings a level of violence, and is just one of the more dynamic playmakers and goal scorers. He doesn't have the same level shot of a Tage Thompson, but he has better playmaking ability. So I think he'd be a really nice fit in Seattle and a great pairing for guys like Matty Beniers or Shane Wright to develop alongside on that wing. Berkeley Catton would also fit in beautifully in that kind of setup. I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities for the forward core if the Seattle Kraken are able to land Porter Martone. But that's everything here for the first segment. We'll move on in the second after a quick word from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. You just realized that your business needs to hire somebody yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. I've been in that spot where you need the right hire like yesterday. The pressure is on, and every day without the right person is a real setback. That's where Indeed sponsored jobs come right in handy. They make sure that your job post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNHL right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. All right, let's keep this episode rolling here in the second segment, breaking down the first top 26 of this mock draft. Again, it's a top 50. If you want to keep watching, it's already going to be posted, so you can keep doing that right after this one wraps up. But let's kick things off here at 9th overall with the Buffalo Sabres selecting, and I think a great fit. If he's even available at this stage, he may very well go higher than this range of the draft on the day of. But Radim Mrtka, the 6'6" right shot defenseman who skates really well, defends excellently, and showed a lot of offensive blossoming towards the end of the campaign with the Seattle Thunderbirds, was playing like 30 minutes a night, was almost a point a game after making the switch over from playing pro hockey in Czechia. And I think that his combination of defensive awareness, sense of timing, and mobility with that range and physicality is a really, really alluring thing, especially if you're a Buffalo Sabres team that needs some more reinforcements as right shots, natural right shots in your defensive core to pair with your first overall left shot defenseman in Owen Power and Rasmus Dahlin. We know that Bowen Byram is on the trade market. I think going for a right shot defenseman to replace him in a couple of years' time would be a really wise decision for the Sabres, who've been going with forwards in the first round here as of late. I think it might be the year where they switch gears a little bit. But at 10th overall, we have the Anaheim Ducks, the team that surprised everyone last year, especially the player himself, Psenicka, at 3rd overall. They may very well have an ace up their sleeve yet again this season. This is a difficult team to predict in terms of what they're going to do on draft day. I think this is a very opportunistic team. They're going to adapt to however the cards fall on the day. But I think if Roger McQueen is available, that the allure of the 6'5" smooth skating power forward who can play center, play on the wing, has great hands, really good shot, good playmaking, drives the middle of the ice, and yeah, missed a good chunk of the season to injury, but it was a back injury that does not have a really high risk of being re-aggravated, and he's now like 45 days fully healthy, like full mobility, no pain, just like feeling back to 100%. I think a team like Anaheim is going to see that situation and be like, this player should not have been available at the slot. Let's just pick him here at 10th overall. So that's what I have them doing. They're still building with size in their forward core. They got a lot of it now in their system, and he brings just another level of skill and dynamism and upside, which I think they would absolutely love. At 11th overall, we have the Pittsburgh Penguins going for a violent defenseman, a left shot defenseman in Kashawn Aitcheson, a player that teams selecting in the teens are very much not expecting to have left available, are praying that he falls into their laps. But here the Pittsburgh Penguins cut that off right before the teens really begin there at 11th overall. I think he's a player that with his hard shot, his decent level mobility for his physical frame, and just crushing violence is going to convince a lot of teams of his value, especially after a playoff campaign where we saw players like Niko Mikkola just dominating opposition with physicality and grit and just a desire to inflict some pain when it matters in all three zones of the ice. And I think that Kashawn Aitcheson would really convince a Pittsburgh team to take that swing on him, even though the offensive upside very much hinges on his shot. It's less dynamic, it's less skill, it's more just brute force. But still, I think he'd be a really interesting piece to kind of define the new era of what Pittsburgh's going to be building towards post Crosby. And I think building around a very physical player is not a bad place to start. At number 12, we have the New York Rangers. We still don't know if they're going to hold on to this pick or not. It's either going to belong to New York or it's going to be a back-to-back situation for the Pittsburgh Penguins, depending if New York wants to cede this year's pick or next year's pick unprotected. protected, which comes with a layer of risk to it. But in this scenario, we have the New York Rangers holding on to this 12th overall selection and banking that they're going to make the playoffs next season. And they're just doubling down on right shot defense. They're seeing defensemen flying off the board, and they're just going for value here, getting a guy who can move really well, is adaptable, is versatile, and could give them a real bona fide elite right shot defense core for a very long time, with Adam Fox and Braden Schneider rolling it out. But I think that he'd be a really good fit with that level of skating ability, with a good sense of physicality, and also a lot of offensive runway too, to become more confident. And I mean, learning under the tutelage of a guy like Adam Fox could certainly support him in hitting that kind of offensive ceiling. But to wrap up this first slide of our top 13 players at the draft, we have Victor Eklund going to the Detroit Red Wings, a team that loves drafting out of Sweden. And here's a player that a lot of people in the public have ranked in the top 10. Very much convinced a lot of us public scouts here over the course of the past 2 years. But he's falling all the way to 13. He might fall out to the top 15 undrafted. That's certainly a possibility. But still, I think Detroit is going to look at this toolkit and just see a player who plays the right way. Hardworking, middle-driven, great playmaker, skilled, really deft in tight, never stops working, and overall, that motor, that pace, just has a great fallback game as a third liner if the skill does not quite carry him to that top 6 capacity that his skill really could grow into. But that wraps up that first top 13. So let's transition over to the second slide that we have over here with picks 14 through 26, highlighted here first and foremost at 14th overall by Braeden Cootes, going to the Columbus Blue Jackets. This is, I think, higher than a lot of people have Cootes going, but he's a player who captained his team this season, led them in scoring, was really just the key cog that made this team function alongside Radim Mrtka upon his arrival from Czechia. And I think that Braeden Cootes' combination of intelligence, motor, dynamism, middle-driven skill, just a real level of bite and ferocity while playing center, good defensive habits as a whole, definitely on the smaller side, but I think that Columbus is going to look at what they have in their system, see quite a lot of size that they have at their disposal, and just take that swing on top 6 upside with Braeden Cootes. At 15th overall, the Vancouver Canucks snag a potential faller on draft day in Jackson Smith, smooth skating, 6'4" left shot defenseman from the WHL and the Tri-City Americans, a guy who just has so much upside, especially in terms of how much further he can raise his offensive ceiling, and overall how his physicality and rush defending could be suffocating at the professional level. I think he'd be a wonderful complement to a Quinn Hughes in terms of locking down that left side long term. He'd be a really, really great complement as well to a player like Tom Willander that could really open up some more of the offensive game with Jackson Smith, which should be very exciting. I think he'd be a great fit in Vancouver if he slips to this rank. Then we have the back-to-back selections of the Montreal Canadiens. And first and foremost, we have the Québécois, the homegrown talent in Justin Carbonneau, the right shot winger, has all the skill in the world, a wicked shot, very good skater, excellent handling ability, really growing as a playmaker as well. And even though he's like an all offense guy in the QMJHL, when playing internationally with Team Canada in like a third line checking capacity, was really able to adapt to that role and be very effective in it. I think the Habs are going to look at this and see a player with so much raw skill, so much runway. They will have watched him dozens of times this year with that 30-minute drive proximity to the Bell Center. And overall, I think he'd be a really interesting guy to kind of hold on to that like Québécois flag in Montreal as an offensive producer. And with guys like Caulfield and Suzuki and Slavkovsky and Demidov in the organization, he wouldn't have to be the guy, right? And I think that would lift some weight off his shoulder as a Québécois player with a lot of offensive skill. It's not going to be a Jonathan Drouin kind of situation where he's expected to be the franchise savior because he's a former high draft pick from Quebec. I think Carbonneau could really come into the lineup and just produce and learn and absorb from all the talent around him. And as an ideal complement to him in terms of skill sets, Carter Bear would be fantastic as well from the Everett Silvertips in the WHL. the most violent forward in this year's draft class, an absolute wrecking ball, constantly working hard, very skilled playmaker as well. The dynamism of his game really should not go understated. And I think he's a player who's going to fall because of that partial laceration of his Achilles, a skate that cut the back of his ankle there towards the end of the season. But within a month and a half or 2 months' time, he was back on his feet and skating again. Very dedicated player in terms of the rehab process, in terms of being there for his teammates. In interviews, also shining light of right after the injury, of being like torturing him to go in to the locker room, spend time with his teammates, and not being able to be there on the ice, but going there anyways for that moral support, going into the playoffs, making those personal sacrifices for the collective gain. This is a real team player who could really take that torch from Brendan Gallagher as a heart and soul spark plug who outworks everyone on the ice every single night. But moving on to 18th overall, we have the Calgary Flames selecting Lynden Lakovic of the Moose Jaw Warriors, a very skilled player, high IQ creator, high-end playmaker, really, really intelligent in his goal-scoring acumen as well. Very good puck handler. The question with him is the physical game. He's 6'4", 200 pounds, but plays like he's 5'10", 170 in terms of the battles he looks to engage in. He even, I think, fractured his arm looking to engage more because he's heard the critiques of his game revolving around that lack of physicality, and he's tried to adjust and also suffered some injuries as a result of those attempts. But definitely a player with high-end offensive upside, should be viewed as a soft skill player rather than a potential power forward just because of his frame. I think that landing with the team like Calgary could be really interesting, especially if you pair him with a guy like Matthew Coronato, who's a bit smaller, but plays more that wrecking ball goal scoring style of game. I think that could be a really nice fit, even though Calgary needs centermen. At this point, they're going for pure value with a player that probably on skill alone should not be available at 18th overall. At 19, and finally for this second segment, we have the St. Louis Blues selecting Malcolm Spence of the Erie Otters, a hard-working winger, really, really solid in terms of two-way intensity, good shot, decent skater, has a good amount of speed and power. He's quite filled out in his physical frame. I don't think there's all that much runway in terms of growing physically with this player. He's kind of like a finished product in that sense, but very powerful guy. I think a really solid and projectable middle six winger. And I think that St. Louis is going to look at that and just see found money here at 19th overall. You're past the halfway point of the first round. You're starting to look for players that you really think are going to at least play minutes in the National Hockey League. And that's definitely something that will be the case for Malcolm Spence, and he's going to be quality in those minutes as well, even if the upside isn't as high end as a couple other names left available here at this stage. But that wraps up the second segment. In the next one, we'll wrap up the show here with picks 20 through 26. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. There's nothing quite like playoff hockey. The energy, the rivalries, the nonstop action. And even though the season has wrapped up, Game Time still gives you a bunch of things to save money on last minute. Whether you want to go to a theater performance or a comedy show or any other kind of sporting event, Game Time's all-in pricing with no hidden fees is always a way to make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck. You can save huge with zone deals. They pick the best seats for you at the lowest price, and right now, you can get up to 10% off on exclusive zone deals for the FIFA Club World Cup matchups. Seeing my exact seat view before checkout also gives me total confidence that I'm getting a seat I can rely on for my view. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's wrap up this first part of our mock draft episode here in the third segment, kicking it off at 20th overall with Blake Fiddler going to the Columbus Blue Jackets. A smooth skating right shot defenseman, very young for the draft class, a June or July birthday. And what he brings on top of that high-end mobility is a really impressive level of physicality, great rush defending, really suffocating in transition, and a real strength in the breakout. He's still learning how to contribute in terms of offensive zone possessions and getting entries into the O zone, but getting pucks out of the defensive zone with control, up the ice with pace is a real area of strength. And I think Columbus is going to look at that, look at their right shot defense pool, see a name like Charlie Elick in there who's quite solid, but might be a third pairing guy if he pans out. But in terms of that second pair potential, I think Blake Fiddler could really add another element of what they have in their system, especially after losing David Jiricek in that trade with the Minnesota Wild. So I'm looking at that as a really enticing option for the Columbus Blue Jackets because he also brings a diversity of elements they don't always have, especially among the young defensemen. Guys like Matejchuk don't have this level of physicality and size and rush defending ability. And even though I think there's still growing room with Fiddler, Columbus might look at this player and want to develop him into a defensive specialist. He has the tools. He has the rush defending ability. He has that just steal space away kind of intuition on the ice in the defensive zone that could really be funneled in that direction, which would be very interesting. But at number 21, we have the Ottawa Senators selecting, and I have them going with a big center in Bill Zonnon from the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies in the QMJHL, a very intelligent playmaking center who moved from the wing to center this campaign, but looked really good after making that switch and in a top line capacity nonetheless. And overall, I think he's a guy that still has growing room in terms of the skating still improving a notch or two. It definitely took strides this season and improved significantly. But if another season of that, he starts moving with more fluidity and overall confidence, I think this is a guy that could really push for a middle six spot there with the Ottawa Senators, bringing a bit more diversity in terms of what they have among their center core. And he can also play in the wing, of course. So I think that versatility would be really enticing to Ottawa, as well as that physicality and just natural playmaking instinct in the offensive zone. At 22nd overall, we have the Philadelphia Flyers selecting their second pick here of the mock draft. I believe they have 6 top 50 selections. So you're going to hear the Flyers selecting a lot of players in this show. Well, mostly in part 2, but still, I think that Joshua Ravensbergen, a goaltender, makes a lot of sense in this spot. I think for a lot of teams, this is the top goaltender in the draft class. You're going to see some teams disagreeing and maybe saying that's Semyon Frolov, who's playing over in Russia in the NHL this season. But I think that Ravensbergen is still likely the first goaltender off the board on draft day. And Philadelphia might just look at their picks and see a lot of opportunity to get falling skill guys and pretty good big defensemen who are available in the second round with those second round selections, of which they have 4 in the first half. Again, lots of capital in round 2 for the Flyers. And then just decide to take their favorite goaltender of the entire draft class with this selection. I think it makes sense. They don't have the most depth, I would say, in goal in their prospect pool. So kind of shoring that up makes some sense with the selection. And Ravensbergen brings NHL projectable habits, intelligence, excellent skating, really good size at 6'5". He might still be growing beyond that. Overall, I think he'd be a really interesting fit in Philadelphia. At 23rd overall, the Nashville Predators, with their second pick of the draft after going for James Hagens at number 5, are going for a defenseman here in Cameron Reid. Again, not the biggest guy in the world. 6 feet tall, 186 pounds. He's got a bit of weight behind him, but definitely not all that tall. But he's a fantastic skater. His coach likened his skating to that of Miro Heiskanen, of course, one of the best skating defensemen in the entire National Hockey League. And though he misses a little bit of that size, Heiskanen's 6'2", he definitely still brings that marauding quality in terms of turning defense into offense, patrolling a really wide range. And overall, he's a guy that I've just loved in terms of the intelligence of the game, the intuition on the ice, and overall how that mobility unlocks so many facets for him, but going in both directions. He's quite skilled offensively and quite reliable defensively. That makes a lot of sense for a Nashville Predators team looking to add some more youth into their defensive core here in the coming seasons. But at 24th overall, we have the Los Angeles Kings selecting, and I think that a powerful winger would make quite a bit of sense here. They already got one of those last year with Liam Greentree there, who had a fantastic D+1 campaign. But I think that Jack Murtagh from the U.S. National Team Development Program would be very appealing ceiling in this range. He's very pacey. He's quite violent, has a wicked shot on him, and grew significantly as a playmaker as the year progressed. He's a guy that I think could really be a strong scorer in a middle six capacity, but has a really projectable fallback game if the skill doesn't carry him all the way up the lineup like it potentially could. He's still going to be a fantastic bottom six checker who brings depth goal scoring, can chip in on both special teams units. And I think that versatility is something that Ken Holland and the LA Kings are going to really appreciate. But moving on and sticking with a right winger from the USHL, we have the Chicago Blackhawks at 25th overall, going for Václav Nestrašil, my favorite player from the USHL this season, who I scouted extensively. Powerful winger, moves well. He's got a high motor, good amount of skill. Growing into his power forward frame at 6'6", 190 pounds. He's still learning how to use his body proactively, but this was the first season where his coaches told him to be physical. He's really just beginning to learn how to do this and was doing it quite effectively at year's end. And you add to that high-end handling skill, really impressive playmaking, and a pretty heavy shot, and you have a well-rounded power forward who's on an upward trajectory. He's going to a good program at the University of Massachusetts in the NCAA, where he's committed for next season already. Very good situation for him. I think that he's going to be a great get for the Chicago Blackhawks here, who are still looking to add some more size among skilled players who can play in their middle six long term. And in terms of compliments for guys like Frank Nazar and Oliver Moore, I think that Václav Nestrašil is right up their alley. But to wrap up this first part of our final mock draft of the season, we have a 26th overall, the Nashville Predators, with another selection, sticking with defense, but adding a bit more size to their lineup. Reminder, they went with Hagens at 5th overall and with Cameron Reid at 23rd. So at 26th, they're going with Max Psenicka, playing with the Portland Winterhawks in the WHL. He's a right shot defenseman, 6'5", 185 pounds, skates very well, moves the puck well, played very impressive minutes after coming over from playing pro hockey in Czechia, where he looked a lot more hit or miss early in the season. He very much caught his footing upon arriving in Canadian junior hockey. And overall, I think he's a player that brings a real level of upside, good defensive upside, but also some more offensive growing potential as well. Overall, he's a player that brings a versatility there on the defensive side. And again, Nashville is going to be looking for right shot players to kind of take the reins, because Dante Fabro was lost to waivers this season. Alexander Carrier was traded for Justin Barron, and that trade isn't aging all that well for the Nashville Predators. They need reinforcements down the right side, and I think Psenicka would be a really good fit in this organization. But that wraps up the show here. This is, again, part one. We have part two, where we're looking through picks 27 to 50 of a top 50 mock draft. Again, we're going to have these visuals and graphics up for your visual entertainment if you're watching on YouTube for that. But for this show, thank you so much for listening. As always, if you're watching on YouTube, please do make sure to leave us a comment down below. What are your thoughts on these fits? I'd love to see what your thoughts are on where these players should go, which players are really good fits with the teams they have them going, and maybe which ones are a bit less good of a fit. I'd love to hear of your opinions down below as always. And if you're listening on a favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always appreciate our everydayers here on the show. And for your second listen, you're going to head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything that you need to know to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. Thanks so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian Hine. I look forward to catching you tuning in again very soon.